to our very first activity. I see Olivia is back with us. I hope that everybody else is able to join. We've got one person on. Olivia, I wonder if you could help me make sure we get everybody on stage as we move into our first activity.
You bet, absolutely.
Oh, I want to make sure I can hear you. Can you say that one more time?
Oh, can you hear me okay?
I can now, yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So as you can see in our live activity, we're going to be using Slido, that interactive software tool that we tried to use at the beginning and had a little bit of success with because a lot of folks couldn't necessarily see my screen. Again, I'd like you to try to join at slido.com, type in the number 530597, or use the QR code. So we'll continue to have this information up for each of the questions that we have. Also, if you're interested, as we're walking through this activity, there's a workbook that goes along with it, so you can see what it is that we're doing as we go. Not necessary if you don't want to, but it is available under the resources. Again, for those of you who are just now joining us, you can join us at slido.com to answer our questions. Type in the number 530597.
And then just as a note right there, I've invited everybody that I see on stage. That just means that you're able to unmute yourself and talk. You absolutely do not have to. You can continue to use the chat and Slido, but if you're interested in asking a question or participating verbally, just know that you're able to unmute yourself now and participate. The second thing I'll mention is the toolkit that Donna was mentioning is down on the bottom left-hand side of your screen where it says resources here in red. So you should be able to see that at your convenience whenever you need it. It's on every single page down at the left-hand side in red.
Great. Thank you for reminding everybody of that, Olivia, especially since most of you didn't get to see the intro where we showed you where that was. So yeah, that's where both the toolkit and the workbook activity are. And so the toolkit is just yours to take back to your organization and share with others. So what we're going to be doing today on this activity is walking through this PDSA template that we talked about before. So somebody is asking for the Slido code again. Olivia, I wonder if you can add that to the chat. But we have a 10-step framework that we are going to follow. We've outlined that in the toolkit, and that's what we're going to follow for this activity. So we have chosen for this activity a non-healthcare situation, one that many of you may be very familiar with. And so we thought that this would be it would be a good challenge for several reasons. First of all, because it's something that everybody can relate to. And second of all, because everybody has such different challenges in healthcare that it's just really impossible to find something that everybody would relate to. So here's the situation today. We've got Maria and her 10-year-old son, John, who both dread mornings because John's late for school all the time and he's in jeopardy of failing the school year. Maria generally has to wake him several times before he'll get out of bed, which leads to frequent arguments. And mornings have become a very tense time for the entire family. So that's the situation that we're going to be walking through here today. So again, go on to slido.com at 530597 is the number, and answer this question for me. Everybody involved agrees that this is a problem. Everybody in Maria's family says this is a problem that we have to solve. But Maria's best friend is chosen to be the project leader. So why do you think Maria and her husband were not chosen for this role? Great. So one person has said they're too emotionally invested and they might not be objective. Okay. Anybody else? And everybody's saying the same thing. Right. Exactly. So very often in healthcare, in your situation, maybe you have people who are not chosen because they don't have any formal training in PI or because they don't have time. Those are very valid reasons. But generally, when folks are too close to the situation, we don't want them to be the project leader because they can't be as objective. So So the very first step, step number one in this PDSA framework that we have, is to identify the problem in the background. Now, this is critical. This is really critical. And so very often, we're not really clear on what the problem is that we're trying to solve. So the project leader is responsible for working with the organization and the team that's going to be put into place to really clarify what is it that we want, what's the problem that is happening, and what is all the information that we need to know about the background. In other words, what else has been tried in the past, and what has failed. I mean, sometimes that's really important to know. So a lot of times also what folks do is they state that problem as a solution, right? So maybe they'll say the problem is that we don't have staffing, because we're assuming that staffing is the solution to our problem. May or may not be true. So I encourage you, when you're trying to identify what the problem is, really just try to be as objective as you possibly can without also suggesting how to fix it. So here is the problem statement that Maria's friend has come up with. Maria is frustrated with her 10-year-old son, John, who resists waking up most mornings because he stays up too late at night. And this is causing significant stress in Maria's day. Okay, so this is the problem. And so notice also that we haven't identified a solution in the problem. We're just stating what the issue is. So how would you rate the quality of that problem statement? Again, back on Slido here. So good. Okay, we've got a good. Very good. Okay. All right. So far people are in agreement that Maria's friend has done a fairly good job of identifying that problem statement. Okay. Excellent. Okay. Nobody has said it's an excellent statement, but Maria's friend got some feedback and said, okay, you're absolutely right. Let's see if we can't make this problem statement a little bit better, a little bit more robust. So we're saying Maria's 10-year-old son, John, has been late for school 48% of days this term and is now at risk of failing the entire school year. This has resulted in frustration and stress for the entire family. Failure to address this problem could negatively impact John's educational future, social relationship with peers, and familial connections for the rest of his life. So what do you think about that? Do you think that we did a better job on this problem statement? I'd be interested to know why or why not you think it's better. Again, we'll be using Slido the rest of this activity and for activity number 2. So make sure that you've got it up and you're either on your phone joining with the QR code, or you are joining at slido.com and putting in that number 530597. Because it's specific and it gives repercussions if it's not addressed. Exactly. So, this is our opportunity when we're writing a problem statement to get people's attention, to make people stand up and take notice. Oh my goodness, we had better fix that problem. This is not good. Okay. Great. It's better. Okay. A better statement. Good. Good. Okay. And it's more specific. Excellent. If anybody is having trouble using Slido, please do also feel free to use the chat. It's just easier if we have it up here on the screen, but we can certainly, we'll take your feedback any way that we can get it. Okay, so in addition to having a problem statement, we also want to start with a background statement. We want everybody to understand not only what the problem is, but what has happened up until this point. So Maria struggled to wake John in the mornings for the past 2 years after the family moved to a new city and he began attending. There have been multiple meetings with his teachers, every time that's been followed by punishment at home. So he's been restricted in activities. And every time that's happened, he's had short-term behavior improvement, but it only lasted just a few weeks. Sounds like my kids when they were growing up. John has also been falling behind in schoolwork and his grades are poor. He enjoys video games and he often stays up late at night to play them after Maria thinks he's gone to bed. John has showed marked improvement in December and January after Maria told him that he wouldn't have a birthday celebration if he did not improve. But after his birthday at the end of January, he slipped back into old behaviors. So, again, important information to have. Now that we've got that context, we can start thinking about, okay, who needs to be on our team? Now, Olivia, I wonder if you can help me with this one. I know you're a fan of the SIPOC. Would you be interested in sharing with everybody what they would need to do to complete a SIPOC?
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Donna, for the great introduction here. And thank you, everybody, for participating. This is really exciting to see so many people engaged. As Donna mentioned, I'm a huge fan of the SIPOC because I myself have been in situations where you get halfway through a project and you're like, darn, I wish I had, this person on my team. And then you have to go back and get that person and reiterate everything that you already did. And you missed a step from their expertise. And it's just best to know exactly who you need on your team before you even get started. So that's the entire purpose of the SIPOC. And Donna, if you could go to the next slide here. Alrighty, so we're going to start our SIPOC by outlining the very, very high level process steps. Again, you don't have your team yet, so you're probably not going to know all of the detailed process steps, and you don't need it. In a very, very high level, kind of what's happening from the start to the end. And then from there, you'll be able to fill out, okay, well, what is the input to this step? What is the output from this step? Who's supplying the input to this step and who's consuming the output from this step. So taking a look at our example here, and again, this is a high level sort of outline of our process steps here just to get it on paper so we can understand who we need. Our first step in this hypothetical example may be that we prepare for bed. We set an alarm, we go to sleep, we wake up, we get out of bed, we get dressed, we eat breakfast, we leave for school, and we arrive at school on time. Again, you can, fill in any blanks here. Typically, we don't like to push our SIPOCs beyond, about 5 to 7 high-level process steps because you don't need it. Purpose of this is to determine who you need on your team. So, Donna, if you could go to the next slide here. So now is when we're going to start adding in some of our valuable components that'll tell us exactly who we need. So as I mentioned in that dark blue color there, those are your process steps. And then you have your suppliers, your inputs, your process, your output, and your consumer on the top, hence the acronym of SIPOC. So for our first process step, we're looking at preparing for bed. So this might involve an input of, sleepwear, toothpaste, you name it here. Those who might be supplying those inputs might be John's father, maybe Maria, maybe John's siblings. Again, very flexible here. Your output for preparing to bed is that you're ready for bed. John is ready to go to bed. And then the customer of that output is John himself. So I'll do maybe 1 or 2 more examples just so you can kind of get a feel of how this works here. Our second process step may be setting the alarm. So our supply or our inputs right here is the alarm itself and the reminder to set it. And maybe our supplier here may be Maria, John, his father, whomever is setting the alarm or setting the reminder to set the alarm. Our output is an alarm that's set for the appropriate time. And our customers of that would be John and Maria. So you can see for each of these process steps, we're really looking at pretty in depth about exactly what is the input and exactly what is that process step going to result in and who's supplying the input and who's consuming the output. Mm-hmm. So Donna, I'll kick it back to you to see if there's anything that I missed there.
No, excellent job. Thank you, Olivia. And, sometimes this SIPOC is really helpful because it'll help you to identify those people that you don't typically think about. So, in this situation, we've involved John's teacher and John's pediatrician. And, certainly people that most families wouldn't think about including in a project, not that any other family besides mine does performance improvement projects on ourselves, but if you are working in the emergency department and you're doing an improvement project, it's really easy to folks in the lab, the folks in security, the folks on the inpatient side, and anybody else that might be involved. So that's why doing a SIPOC is so very helpful. So what do you think? Do you think we missed anything on the SIPOC? Is there anybody else that we should have involved in this that we did not? Any thoughts there, anybody? I think because Olivia did such a fabulous job on that SIPOC. So yeah, that's right. Great job, Olivia. So yeah, I think, but again, there's always folks whose input we can get. Another thing to remember too is, especially in the hospital setting, what we think about sometimes is having people on a project team and then bringing them to a meeting or bringing them to a Kaizen event for 5 days and taking them out of staffing. Very often we can get all of those people's input without actually physically bringing them to a meeting. So think outside the box about how we can communicate with people and not impact their daily work at the same time. Okay, so the next step after we now know exactly what the problem is, we have shared that problem in the background with everybody, we've put together a team. The next step is now to assess the current state. We want to know exactly what is currently happening. And what we do a lot is we make an assumption that we know this. I know what's happening. I know no matter how close you are to the process, it's really important to take a step back and objectively observe those workflows, especially at different times of the day or week, right? So we all know that night shift is a very different world in hospitals than it is on day shift, and weekends certainly are not like they are Monday through Friday. So be objective, really identify what's happening, interview the people that you've identified in your SIPOC. Again, don't need to take them to a meeting to do that. You can go to them and ask them, because what we really want to do is seek to understand what is happening. Analyze any data that you have and track data that you don't have. So sometimes it's really hard to start a project if maybe when you're doing your current state assessment, you identify we don't have the data that we need to tell us whether or not we have a problem. So now we've got to track some data before we can get started. Now, using a project plan, you have that tool in your toolkit. Using a project plan is the best way to communicate to everybody what you're working on. So if you've got a problem in a background statement there, you can then add a short narrative to that project plan about what is happening, and maybe even create a process map for that. I'm going to run through the data real quick, and then I'm going to have Olivia go through how to do a process map. But when you're doing your data, in this case, and this data is for John, you can see that what we've tracked is the percent of nights that he's gone to bed on time, only 54.7%. The number of times Maria's had to wake him up, which is 2.7 times every week she's had to wake him up. 49.3% of the time he's ready for school by 7:30 a.m. and 48% of the time he's late for school. So, question for everybody here, now that you've seen our data table, is this enough data? Do we have the data that we need to be able to solve this problem? Is there any other data that you might want to see? And again, the problem that we're trying to solve is that he's waking up late, and he's not and part of the reason why he is late for school is because he's waking up late all the time, and so could use more of the data on when he does go to sleep. Okay, good. Yep. Okay. So looking at our data, so this is analysis over time. Now, one of the things that you saw in the first slide was just a snapshot, right? It's just a data table. It doesn't really give us a whole lot of data because it's just telling us about that snapshot in time instead of showing trends over time. So that's another way that you might want to think about when you're assessing your current state. And in terms of visualizing your data, how do you be able to show a true picture of what's been happening up until this point? And so you can see, just as we talked about in the beginning, that in January, January was the time that right around his birthday, and the average number of times that Maria had to wake him improved as he got closer to his birthday, and he thought he was not going to get a party if he didn't improve. As soon as his birthday was over, then the behavior came back. So, again, adding those data points to the chart and a trend line can be really helpful, because this is, data chart right here shows trends over time, but it doesn't really necessarily give you as much data as the second table does. So here's some other data trends that you're seeing. Again, the percent of nights to bed on time, the number of times Maria has to wake him, how often he's late for school, and the days that he's ready by 7:30. All trending over time, all showing that his behavior changed in January, and that's consistent across the board. So, and I think I gave away the answer to this when I just told you that, you know, his behavior improved in January. But any other data, any other stories you can see from this data? You know, and again, that's really what we're going to be after is, you know, there's a relationship. Yeah, that's right. So it's all, you know, and that's really what you're after when you're in the hospital. Or in any healthcare setting and you're doing a performance improvement project. What is all of the data that you're looking at, and what is that relationship there? Again, if we went back to our example of the emergency department, looking at discharge times in the inpatient area could very much correlate with the increase in wait times in the emergency department. So, so being able to trend that across the board is important. Great. Yep. His birthday definitely motivated him to do some different things. So here you can see what we've done is we've trended all of the data together. I see this a lot that folks will make a chart and try to put a whole bunch of data points on the same table. It's kind of busy. So if you take out that one outlier and just trend that like data together, that, you know, because like if you look here, we also have the average number of times that Maria has to wake him. But the number of times is different than, it's not expressed in a percent, right? So this chart shows all of the data that is expressed in a percent together. And again, you can see that correlation right there in January. I keep giving away the answers, don't I, Olivia? Any other thoughts on trending data together on the same chart? Have you seen that in your experience? Have you seen people, if it's like data? Yeah. Have you seen people in your experience though that are trying to put too much information on one chart to, you know, and it can get quite busy and quite confusing.
I've done that. You learn pretty fast.
Yeah. All right. So Olivia, you want to talk about process maps?
Yes, absolutely. Well, while I'm kind of introing our process maps here, I see some folks have already gotten started with answering our Slido question here. You know, help me out and give me a cue as far as where you all are. But process mapping is one of my favorite activities to do because that's when you have your group together and you're really looking at exactly what is happening. How can we align this with what's really going on the front line here? So again, the purpose of the process map is to get a really clear illustration of the step-by-step processes that are happening in live time on the front line, which is exactly why it's so important that we did the SIPOC first, because your nurse is probably going to have a completely different perspective than environmental services, than the lab, than the physician. So having a clear understanding of the complexities that may compromise even the simplest of processes is really, really important, so that you have a clear picture of exactly what problem are you trying to solve before you jump in. So one of the key points here is you're going to want to map out the steps in a process map from the point of view of the consumer. Oftentimes in healthcare, this is going to be the patient. But one thing that we often see is, you know, I am Olivia and I see my, you know, my process as I see it as the bedside nurse or something like that. But I'm only one bedside nurse that's probably involved in the patient's care with 6 other bedside nurses and 3 other physicians and, you know, a nursing assistant. So my perspective of the process only matters so much so that I can contribute to creating that holistic view of the patient experience. So we're going to want to start with the high-level process steps outlined in the SIPOC. That's where you as a facilitator can kind of get that conversation going and say, hey, I'm Olivia. I'm the facilitator of this meeting. Really great to meet everybody. Here's what I know of your existing process. You're all here to help me inform that, add detail as needed. One of the things that we've done, here at the Patient Safety Movement is we go back and forth between using sticky notes on a wall and using available software where you can, really clearly kind of illustrate things. And that's really helpful for virtual teams, of course, but I know that many folks and organizations still use stickies, so whatever works, best for your organization. Donna, do you want to go to the next slide? Alrighty, and I'll kick it back to you.
Yeah, so now we have a process map. We've very clearly outlined what our current state is. So now we're ready to move into step 4. And that's, so, we know where we are. Now we need to know, where do we want to be? And here is where I really encourage project teams to think outside the box. Sometimes it can be really fun to get a team together to draw some pictures and be creative and have a lot of fun with it. On your project plan, you can draft a narrative to be, to talk about where you want to be, or you can snap a picture of whatever it is that you drew. You can see here that, in the picture, everybody in the family is happy. John's off to school. He's getting a better report card. So we could, on the project plan, put a copy of that picture as well as a narrative, such as this that we have here. Our future state is that John wakes himself every morning without Maria's help. He's prepared for school by 7:30 a.m. every day, and he has no tardiness. Mornings are pleasant. There's no yelling or stress. The family relationships are intact, and John never requires punishment for tardiness. He enjoys going to school, and he gets good grades. So if you think about, some of the future states conversations that you might have in your organization, there are people who will say, this is not possible. It's not possible that every single day he's going to get up and he's never going to be tardy again, and everything is going to be fine. So, let's not strive for perfect. Let's strive for what we think we can achieve. So yes, that's true when we're establishing our SMART goals, that we don't want to say in our SMART goals, that we're going to achieve something that's undoable. But when you're imagining that future state, this is where you want to be pie in the sky. This is where you want to say, this is the land of perfect that we are striving for. We might not get there with this iteration, but we're striving for it. Olivia?
Alrighty, so kind of jumping back to our process map, we've analyzed our current process steps. We've talked about our pie in the sky future state, and now it's time to look at, okay, well, what's the difference between what's happening right now and what we just said is our pie in the sky goal? And that's where that's where our practice gaps come in here. And, for each process step, we're going to want to, understand exactly what's preventing that person from getting where they need to be. And again, this is imperative that you have the perspective of multidisciplinary team members that, touch this process every single day and can speak to the fact that, oh, well, when this thing happens on Mondays, it really throws me, 30 minutes late in the day, and then I have to adjust or compensate my process like this, and then my report is late or whatever it may be. Believe me, they'll tell you all of the problems that are going on. But of course, this is contingent on them feeling safe, psychologically safe to disclose some of the things that prevent them from, achieving the ideal workflow. And in many organizations, that's a huge, huge barrier. But, assuming that we have a really cohesive, psychologically safe team with both our core and our ad hoc team members, we really want to, mess up this process map and start from the very beginning and say, what is everything that could compromise this going wrong here. And as you see on our map, we've represented it as, orange stars here, but, you can use whatever symbol works best in your organization. And so again, the purpose of this is so that you can lay it all out and say, all right, well, what are our gaps of priority here, which I think that we're going to get to in the next slide.
Yeah, and a few of these gaps, again, we're trying to dig down to the root causes of why these steps are happening. So, so maybe we can talk, Olivia, just about some of the reasons for that we've come up with. I know it might be a little bit difficult for people to see on the screen, but for example, when you think about John getting out of bed and gets dressed, he one of the gaps that we've identified here is that he takes his showers in the morning, and he also gets distracted very easily while he's getting dressed. And then He falls asleep sometimes on the bathroom floor while he's brushing his teeth. So we could continue to dive into the gaps for each of those gaps, right? Why is he falling asleep? Why is he getting distracted? So this map can get out of control pretty quick, but you know, so you can use, as Olivia said, you can use some kind of software like this. You can use just little sticky notes, but try to capture as many thoughts and ideas as you can through a brainstorming session that you have with the team. Again, I want to reinforce that you don't have to have all of the members of a team in place and sitting in chairs in a meeting room. I worry just a little bit about our frontline, especially these days. It's so, they are so challenged with just taking care of patients, and we want to involve them in performance improvement, and we want their input, but we can't afford to take them out of their environment and put them into a room and ask them questions. So, very often what I would do in the past is create these process maps and then go out to the departments and make rounds and say, hey, this is what we've identified. Is there anything that you can add? And then, add all of their comments, and then, have as many people as you can get together, look at it, validate it, make sure there's nothing else, and then go back out again and say, okay, we've updated it one more time. Is this right? So don't be afraid to take your time in establishing the process steps and analyzing the practice gaps, because you want to make sure that you've identified all of the gaps so that you can then begin to brainstorm potential solutions. So what we want is a potential solution for every one of those gaps. Sometimes you can take those gaps and you can combine them. Three of those gaps really could be solved with one solution, and that's great. But again, take your time, make sure you're really drilling down to the root causes and thinking outside the box about what those solutions could be. So an example here, again, we talked about how John getting out of bed and getting dressed on time was impeded by the fact that he takes his showers in the morning. And a potential solution is stop taking showers in the morning, take them at night instead. So what we do here at the Patient Safety Movement is we use these little clouds to represent the solutions, so that our map is very clear what the processes are, what the gaps are, and what the solutions are.
Donna, could I just jump in really quickly? You said something that inspired something in my brain. I think, one of the things to emphasize too, the people from whom we're soliciting input on the gaps within may not know that there's a gap in the process step, the behaviors that they're doing day in and day out, because we as human beings develop workarounds for whatever, stated policy or procedure or whatever it may be. So just kind of nurturing that conversation with folks, they may have very overt gaps that are very, very clearly obvious, but then kind of digging into, okay, well, how do they actually do the work in a way that's just become so normalized that may actually be a gap kind of waiting in disguise. So that's, and Donna, right when you said kind of taking your time with things, I think it's so important, in that sense too, to really kind of nurture some of the things that we just take for granted in our day-to-day hustle and bustle, on the front line, that may be a risk waiting to happen.
Agreed. That's a really great point, Olivia. And I'd love, we've got lots of time. We're a little bit ahead of schedule on this, so we've got lots of time. I'd love if anybody in the audience has any, has had any experiences that you want to share about working with teams and having them brainstorm gaps and potential solutions. Those you can unmute, you can turn your camera on, you can put it in the chat. So please do let us know if you have any comments about what we're talking about. Okay, so now we have all of our solutions. We've identified all of our gaps. We've identified potential solutions for every one of those gaps. Now the question is, what can we reasonably do? So in here, somebody is saying interviews and the use of the 5 whys vigorously to get to your root causes. Exactly. So asking why 5 times is a great way of making sure that we've identified all of those potential gaps. And but here when we've got our solutions, we know that we can't possibly do everything. And so what we want to do is we want to get an idea of all of the work that we want to do over time, and have that plan, that long-term plan, and say, we're going to address all of these solutions over the next year or 2 years, but for right now, what are we going to do immediately today? And so a prioritization grid can really help to identify what you want to focus your energies on in terms of what the level of urgency is for an organization. In other words, how important it is for the financial bottom line, for patient outcomes, or whatever it is that you're looking at, and then also the organizational impact. So what you can see that we have done here is anything that is a low level of urgency or a low organizational impact is in the don't do column. Anything that's a high level of urgency and a high organizational impact is in the must do column. And then anything that's in the middle is kind of nice to have. So, usually what ends up happening after you've plotted all of your potential solutions is you're going to focus on doing all of these things that are up here. You're just going to leave these off of the list altogether. And these in the middle are going to be the solutions that you're looking at in 6 months, 9 months, 12 months from now, after you've tackled the higher priorities. So here's what we did. We took all of our little clouds from from our map, and we organized them here. And you can see that we have a lot of must-dos. There's really nothing that we have prioritized as a don't do. In this case, we're just talking about Maria and John. There's probably a lot of things that are much easier to do in this particular case than there are in a large organization with lots of complexity. So, but I'd love for you to think about your teams. I mean, I'm sure that some of you have led or participated in performance improvement activities where there's a whole bunch of ideas and you want to do so many things all at once. What words would you use to describe that team? Burned out, yeah. Overwhelmed and frozen. Very, very good. I mean, and we talk about burnout right now. That's quite a big topic with all of our healthcare professionals. So throwing more performance improvement stuff at them on top of them already being burnt out is that's definitely challenging for organizations these days. Any other words that you would use to describe that team that's prioritized just too many things to do? Discouraged. Yeah. But I hear a lot, Olivia. I don't know if you hear this from folks, but I hear clinicians and other folks in the front line, when they think about performance improvement, they kind of roll their eyes and go, "Oh God, please don't make me do a project plan. Please don't make me do a Kaizen event or a rapid improvement project." Have you heard that, Olivia, from people?
Definitely. And it doesn't really matter what discipline you're in. It seems as though it's a kind of across the board reaction, but it's because we have not set them up for success in being able to use the tools for performance improvement and acknowledged the inherent skills that many people do have in performance improvement, especially those who are clinicians who are doing this, kind of day to day. So when we throw words like, Kaizen and things, out to people who may not have that background, it's definitely discouraging. I can speak to that as kind of a young learner myself. You get overwhelmed pretty quickly when, you really could boil it down into its basic components and simplify it for that person.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. And Jenny's added in the chat groupthink. That, absolutely. So very often, we're not really able to pair out the most important stuff because the entire group is thinking we have to do all of this work and we have to do it now. And sometimes when you're sitting in that complacency, oh yeah, that's a great word. We're sitting in this meeting room and we're having a conversation about what we can do about this performance improvement project, and all the people sitting around the table are thinking, yeah, we can do all that. Absolutely, that's where that group think comes in. We're thinking that that we can bite off much more than we can chew. So, and absolutely right, the front line then just becomes complacent, and then we come along and say we've got another performance improvement project to do. And they sometimes will be very open and honest with you and tell you how they feel about that. Other times they wait until you leave and then they talk about it behind your back.
I
Right?
think I think another thing too is like this is kind of the crux of setting yourself up for success in the future. You know, if you're prioritizing too many things initially, great, it may work while people are kind of struggling to juggle all of those things. But you're not setting yourself up effectively for sustainment. And so I think this is a really early indicator if you're kind of getting the perspective of the group that maybe prioritize too many things. And we see it all the time, is we just worked on this 2 years ago. How are we revisiting falls or sepsis again?
Mhm.
And this could be, something to look at, is maybe we prioritize too many things in the beginning.
And the other thing to think about here too is what other activities are happening in the organization at the same time. So, here at the Patient Safety Movement, we talk about the concept of holistic continuous improvement, meaning that the right hand knows what the left hand is improving. So, if you have multiple teams that are all working on performance improvement projects at the same time, a sepsis team, a falls team, a hand washing team, a pressure ulcer team, and so on and so on. The front line is getting inundated with the work that is coming out of all of those performance improvement teams. So again, that just adds to the burden that they feel in terms of being burnt out and discouraged, because it's just too many things at one time. So okay, so we're very clear on what our problem is and what's gotten us to where we are. We know what our current state is. We're very clear about our future goals, our pie in the sky goals. We and what our gaps are that are preventing us from getting there. And we have now identified some solutions that we want to go after and start working on as soon as we can. But the next step then is to identify those measurable goals. So, really what we're asking here is, how are we going to measure the success of the solutions that we have proposed? And I'm sure that you've heard this before about making them SMART goals, making them specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. We want to establish both outcome and process metrics here. And you heard that just a little bit in one of our earlier videos when we were talking about that. There's a difference between those high level project goals, those outcome metrics, and the metrics that are showing whether or not we are driving the outcomes that we're looking for. So I think about, for example, falls, right? If you have a performance improvement team that is trying to drive down falls overall, that's an outcome, right? That's a organizational objective that we want to see change. And there's a lot of different solutions that we might want to put in place to see that outcome improve in reduced falls. And so some of those things might be that we want to make sure that all the patients are wearing yellow socks, that we want to make sure that we've revised our fall risk protocol in the electronic medical record, and so on and so on. Multiple things that we might want to do to drive those falls down. So our process metrics are really around that. If the initiative is to make sure patients are wearing yellow socks, then the process metric is how many days were all of the patients wearing yellow socks. And so those are just as important to track as the outcome metrics. And then you also heard, in Alan Frankel in one of the earlier videos was talking about those cultural outcomes. Is the team on board? In the very beginning, we asked what the challenges were that everybody has, and what we saw was culture. we um, and I love what Jenny was just saying about hourly rounding, effective shift change report, and huddles. That yet all of those things are fabulous, for working on falls, and great process metrics. And but thinking about that, let's go back to that falls idea. What are some of the cultural impacts that are preventing us from being successful in achieving the falls outcomes that we want? We have here at the Patient Safety Movement our actionable patient safety solutions. It outlines all of the best practices for reducing falls. And I tell people all the time, those best practices haven't changed for 15, 20 years. We've been saying the same thing over and over, and yet we still have falls in organizations. So, Olivia, I see you nodding. Did you have some input there?
Yeah, I think this one is so interesting. I was really excited that Alan mentioned this. In terms of our cultural metrics to track here, yes, it's organizational culture, but one in particular that came to my brain when you were talking about falls is literally cultural, and so kind of considering the different cultural backgrounds of those who may be at risk for falls. Whereas, in some, of our Western hospitals, we may not initially consider. So, for example, if we have a fall risk initiative to reduce falls in the home, and we fail to consider that some, people from different backgrounds may wash their feet before, certain meals or iteratively throughout the day. I know that's common practice in some countries, and we fail to detect that, and then we send that patient home. They're going to do what they've been doing for probably 60 or 70 years, according to their religion or their practices or whatever they're doing, which may involve them lugging their leg up on top of a sink, which is, a clear falls risk there. So I think, we have the organizational cultural metrics here, but then we have just the cultural metrics of, the individual, to whom you're providing care, and understanding some of the things that may put them at risk as an individual that we might not be able to see.
That's a really great point. That's a really great point. And I'd be interested in hearing some thoughts from the audience on this as well. What are some of the cultural challenges that you have in your organizations in getting the outcomes that you want, in getting those process metrics to change that you're looking for? Somebody before used the word complacency. How much is it that people are just complacent and they're just used to doing the things that they've always done before, and they don't, they're really not incentivized to do different things. How much of it is personal beliefs? I know I've had lots of nurses say to me, patients fall. It's what happens. And another thing that I hear nurses say to me is a patient has the right to fall. So when we have those different mindsets of that are not just the team, the performance improvement team, but also that frontline team, then we're going to be challenged to get the outcome and the process metrics that we're looking for. So, so think about, how would you measure that? How would you measure your cultural metrics as well as those outcome and those process metrics in your performance improvement project? Oh, Jenny's got some really great ideas in terms of senior leaders. Yeah, absolutely. Senior leaders have got to be engaged. They've got to set the expectations, and be very clear what is important in the organization. When we have many, many, many priorities, then nothing is a priority, right? So those senior leaders need to make it really clear to everybody what they should be focusing on. So, and Stacy's talking about doing intentional rounding involving toileting, and but yeah, she's right. For whatever reason, it's challenging to get buy-in for the nurse to not wait. So and I don't blame those patients. So how do we then, knowing what some of those cultural issues are, how do we design performance improvement projects that are and that are going to address those cultural issues, and then how do we track whether or not that is being successful? So in this particular, go ahead, Olivia.
Oh, no, no, no. I was just really excited about what Jenny and Stacy were saying in the chat. And it makes me think about something that you talk about all the time, Donna, especially the clear expectations is when we're launching a new performance improvement initiative, it's probably piling on to the 400 other things that they have to follow, throughout their day. So the clear expectations being, an alignment with the organizational strategy, but also built into what governs their day-to-day practice. So, their policies and their protocols and, the EHR workflows and, their patient education material, and just really solidifying what you expect of people by building that into the environment that guides their practice and making sure that that's consistent kind of across the board. So sorry to interrupt there, but
No.
I was just really excited by that.
Yes. I'm kind of hoping that other people would interrupt and take themselves off of mute and turn their camera on so we can have more of a discussion.
I will say one point about that too is if folks joined and you don't think that you can get yourself off of mute, just let me know in the chat because I'm not sure who I already moved to the stage yet. So just let me know if you'd like to say something.
Great. Okay. So our SMART goals, this is, we're back to our performance improvement project here with Maria and John. We've come up with a couple of SMART goals. Now, keep in mind this timeline is not necessarily this current calendar year, because in this scenario, it is the end of March when we're doing this, and we're giving ourselves 1 month by the end of April to achieve these goals. So what we want to see is a reduction in the percent of days that John is late for school to less than 5%. We want to see his grades improve by 20%. Those are those outcome metrics that are really that's going to tell us whether or not we're solving the problem that we identified in the beginning of this project. The process outcomes are based on some of the gaps that we identified, right? And the solutions that we're planning to put in place. So this means that we're going to be looking at how many times Maria has to wake him. We want to reduce that to once a day or less. We want to increase the percentage of days that John is ready for school, but to 80%, and the percentage of nights that John goes to bed on time to 80%. And then culturally, we want to increase the number of days that John says that he's happy to go to school to 50%. Now, notice that when we first started this and we were doing our current state assessment, we didn't have that metric in there, the number of days that John says that he's happy to go to school. And the reason for that is because we didn't know to look for it. And we added it after the fact because as we were doing our current state map and identifying all of our gaps, we identified that that was one of the root causes of why he doesn't want to get out of bed in the morning, is that he just is unhappy and he doesn't want to go to school. So our SMART goals don't necessarily have to be aligned exactly with the data that we collect in our current state, because most of the time you learn something that you didn't know while you're going through that gap analysis process. Okay, so what do you think of our goals? Tell me how smart they are. Are we really smart? Little smart? Not very smart? Great, okay. One person thinks we're really smart, Olivia. Okay. So again, we want those goals to be very, very specific. And they are. Each of those goals are very specific. They are measurable. They are actionable, things that we can do something about. They're realistic. They're things, well, some people think that they are realistic, and some people will say maybe not quite so realistic, and there's a time frame. All of them need to be completed by the end of April. So for those who are saying somewhat smart, put in the chat or unmute yourself or tell us what do you think would make them smarter? Be interested on that. And I can also, I know it's kind of hard because those are our SMART goals right there. So, And keep in mind that there is always room for improvement in every project. So we would, so we welcome feedback on this, as I hope that you do as performance improvement teams. Know that we're never perfect in striving for what we're doing. Oh, so Jenny is saying that we should have both short-term and long-term goals. So yeah, that's a really good point. And breaking down the expectations, by the end of the school year. So I think that's a really excellent point. Okay. Okay. So here's where here's where we finally actually get to do. Again, I'd love to hear from the folks in the audience about this, because Olivia, we know, and we have seen even here internally at the patient safety movement on all of our work groups and the coaching that we do, that most people want to skip those first 7 steps and come right to step 8, don't we?
Absolutely. That's something that we're seeing all the time. And that's human nature, right? Is you are kind of an expert in your own role, and you have oversight of your own role. So you think that all right, this is the solution that could work here. But again, process mapping, I as Olivia may be an expert in my role, but that's not from the perspective of the consumer or the patient. So my perspective is just a fraction there of what should be considered, evaluating what solutions are appropriate here, which is why those planning steps are so important. But this is absolutely something that we run into all the time, and definitely something I'm guilty of myself.
Me too. And it took me a long time to learn how to how to slow down and really think about what the P part of that PDSA, right? And so that's what this particular activity is about, and just showing you how long it takes to really effectively plan before we can jump in and start doing. So, again, I'd love for some interaction from the audience here. I'm trying to get back. I clicked out of my. There we go. I can see you now again. I would love to get some folks from the audience to tell us about some situations that might have happened to you when you just jump into a situation instead of planning for it. What happens when you think that you know what to implement and it's not the right thing to do? I mean, I know for me, what I've seen is we don't obviously are not achieving the outcomes that we want to achieve, but also, it's we go back to when we have too many things for people to focus on. All of those words: burnout, complacency, overwhelmed. We go right back to that place when we just jump straight into doing rather than planning, because we make people exhausted and tired. So
I think one thing to jump in on here too is one of the things that I still do and constantly see is when we're talking about our gaps and we put them in the form of solution language. So Donnie, you mentioned that earlier, but that's something I really want to emphasize here, is like kind of sneakily, getting those solutions in before we're actually at the point of doing. So, the gap is lack of staffing or lack of education, or we don't have a new cardiac monitor, or whatever it may be. I see that all the time, and it's very, very hard to avoid.
Agreed. And because we're dealing with patients and we're dealing with people's lives, and so what I hear a lot of people say is, we don't have time for this. We don't have time to plan. We've got to fix something. We have to do it now, or somebody is going to get hurt. And so it is really challenging sometimes to slow down enough to really effectively plan. But when we are ready to when we have done all of that planning, now it's time to create an action plan that clearly identifies who's going to do what by when. And there's got to be one person who is responsible for each of the items on an action plan. I see a lot that it'll be, the falls committee will be responsible for doing X, Y, and Z on an action plan. But if there isn't one who is in charge of the falls committee, who knows that that's their responsibility, then that's going to fall through the cracks and it's not going to get done. So, follow up is so very important in performance improvement, because everybody in the hospital is usually very, very busy and has a million things to do. So, so having really clear action plans and a process for following up on that. We talked about huddles before. Huddles are a great time to talk about the status of any action plans that may be underway on a particular unit, and how are we doing, and are we hitting our goals, and so on.
I think an important point to bring up there too is, we keep talking about, making people feel safe enough to participate in what we're doing. And so to Donna's point, developing that action plan so that you're not putting people on the spot, when you follow up with them in like a group setting and they had no idea that that was their expectation, is really, really important. So just making sure that people understand what their expectations are, so that they feel as though they can come prepared to the best of their ability in whatever the next follow-up meeting or email or whatever it is, and they don't feel as though they're put in the spot. Because what happens when people are put on the spot? They're not likely to participate in the future.
That's right. Exactly. And yeah, so we want to be very respectful of, when people are unable to get to these, because, everybody is very, very busy, and we need to understand that. What is really helpful is to start just with small tests of change. I'm sure that you have all seen what happens when we make a change across the entire organization without making sure that we've worked the kinks out. This can be really challenging, especially when we're looking at changes in the electronic health record, right? Because IT might say, it's either on or it's off. We either make the change for everybody or we make the change for nobody. So it can be difficult to do that, but whenever possible, try a small test of change, and a short period of time could be a day or 2 days. It doesn't have to be 30 days that you're looking to see whether or not something is working. You could do something, one shift in the emergency department and see whether or not that might be something that you want to do. So as you do those small tests, then you add new interventions or spread them to new areas based upon the results that you get. And so there are lots and lots of barriers that we can anticipate in implementing improvement plans in hospitals. We already talked about the first one a few times, and that is time, especially these days. Hospitals are tight. There's, we're in the middle of another surge. Staffing is tight, so time is a huge concern for everybody. And resources. When we talk about resources, it's money, it's staff, it's equipment, and so on. And so you can anticipate that that there are going to be those things to deal with. Lack of accountability, as Olivia was talking about before. So, sometimes the issue is that there just isn't enough people to hold people accountable for doing the items that are on the action plan. Everybody's just spread too thin. And again, culture is a huge barrier here. So, but we know that in order to eliminate these barriers, we've got to have leadership support. If whatever project you're doing, whatever performance improvement project that you're working on is not supported by leadership, then there isn't going to be anybody to remove these barriers for you. And you might be able to, bowl through and get things done, but that effort is not going to be sustained over time, because it's just going to be short-term improvement. And I think here about students in hospitals. How many students, graduate students or doctoral students, do you have that are in the hospital saying, I'd like to do an improvement project on blank? I want to reduce falls. I want to, improve ED throughput, or whatever it is that folks may want to do for their project. If if it's interesting to them and it's something that needs to be addressed, but it is not an organizational priority, then you're not going to have the leadership support to eliminate these barriers that are going to come into play. And you're going to add to the burden line, and and add to that complacency, and add to them not wanting to participate in any performance improvement work moving forward. Focus the resources you have to a solution that might not give a long-term improvement or sustainability. Yeah, and that's true. That's true, Melissa. Sometimes, we have to take very small steps because we know that we're not going to get from point A to point Z. And so in that project plan, we need to outline, what are all of the things that we have to do for the long-term plan, and then what is it that we're going to do right now that we have the ability to do. So, but again, the thing that we have the ability to do is align all of the performance work that is happening across the organization so that we don't have multiple teams competing for the same resources. Again, I think about that electronic health record, and these days, almost every improvement project results in some kind of change in the medical record, but IT can only make so many changes at one time, and a change in one area of the electronic health record might impact a change in another area of the electronic health record and might not be supported by IT because of that. So, if we have 10 different teams that all want changes in the electronic health record, then how do we make sure that work is prioritized at an organizational level, number one? And number two, how do we make sure that collectively those 10 changes don't then add up to more work for the front line? Because it may be just one click by this team and one click by that team and one click by this team, but for the front line, that means 10 more clicks in the electronic health record. So again, anticipate those barriers, not just for this action plan, but for all of the improvement work that's happening across the continuum. Okay, so Olivia, we have quite an action plan for Maria and John, don't we?
Yes, I'm pretty excited about this. So this is an example action plan that we use here at the Patient Safety Movement. This example, but we have the basic components here: the who will do what by when and what's the status. And so we really use these here at PSMF and communicate the status appropriately. Use colors in the date boxes, red, green, yellow, to indicate whether it's overdue or on track. So in this case, the facilitator, for example, is going to do a fishbone to understand why John hates school, and they're going to do that by April 7th. So let's say that they've already completed that. That might be green. Let's say that they're experiencing a barrier and saying that nobody's available for me to meet on this fishbone diagram before April 7th. They're only available on April 10th. Communicate that in the status box so that other people looking at this action plan, understand exactly what's going on at a glance. Our next action step here is Maria's going to allocate routine homework time and involve John's father. John's going to take baths at night instead of showers in the morning. Maria's going to set a recurring alarm, and Maria's going to be more gentle and quieter when waking John up in the morning. And so for all of these, we're going to be communicating that status in that right-hand box there, whether it's going well and it's on track, if there's any sort of barrier, if you're waiting on a new alarm to come in the mail or whatever it is, just making sure that somebody who's looking at this from an outsider's point of view, or somebody that you've assigned responsibility to one of these tasks, to whom you've assigned responsibility to one of these tasks, can look at this and, clearly understand exactly where they are and what's expected of them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's the responsibility of the project leader. The project leader should be making sure that the status of these action items are constantly updated so everybody knows what's happening. And, again, that comes back to accountability. And does that project leader have the ability to hold people accountable? And if that project leader doesn't have the ability to hold people accountable, then is there some kind of leader who can help them to do that? Again, we come back to how do we do that in a respectful way that isn't embarrassing for people, and just keeps people on track. And and I think the other thing that's important to remember is that we're all adults. We're all adults, and we should be able to change those dates when it's appropriate. So I know here at the Patient Safety Movement, as Olivia said, we use these project plans here, and I might assign something to Olivia and say, "Hey, can you get that done by Friday?" And in a lot of cases, Olivia will say, "Absolutely, I can have that done by Friday." And other times she says, "There's no way I can get that done by Friday. Can we please make that due on Wednesday instead of on Friday?" So, but think about the culture that you have in your organizations. Again, back to that very first question that we were asking. If you don't have a culture of continuous improvement, if you don't have a culture of safety, if people don't feel like they can speak up and say, "I can't do that by that day," then it's going to end up, on the project plan for April 7th. And then April 7th is going to come and go, and it's not going to have gotten done. And then that person is going to be embarrassed and not want to participate in performance improvement activities anymore. So make sure that everybody is in agreement about what the right dates are, and also be flexible. Sometimes those dates have to change. We're getting, now it's April 6th and we haven't gotten to it yet. Change it to April 9th. And we can be reasonable about this while also keeping people on track. Okay, so we finished 20 minutes ahead of schedule, Olivia. So we've got 20 minutes until we were supposed to take a break. And so that means that you guys are going to have a 30-minute, actually we've got 19 minutes now. So
But I think, especially to your point earlier, I think everybody is definitely hungry for extra time in their day. So hopefully this will be a nice, 30-minute break for everybody. Our next session, as you see on the screen here, is going to be moderated by one of our fellows, Ebby. So this is all about data management and pretty, heavily in depth here. But first, we are going to be taking a break. And because we did finish, a few minutes early, we're going to come back from the break at 11:30. And that is Pacific time. So that's going to be 2:30 Eastern time. So you have just over a half an hour right now for a lunch break or a dinner break, wherever you are in the world, to take a few minutes there. But we'll be back in 33 minutes, 11:30 Pacific time, 2:30 Eastern time. And if you have any questions, we'll be monitoring the chat accordingly. If you have any questions about CE, the slides, the content, whatever it may be. But we'll see you back in 33 minutes.
That's right. And then when you come back, that data management video will automatically start playing. And then after that, we're going to come back and talk about the S and the A of the PDSA. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Awesome. Thanks, Donna. Great job.